Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome from the University of Bonn. Here specifically, I'm at the Institute for Science and Ethics. It's wonderful to have you all join us this morning. To all of the speakers and panelists who are joining us on the Zoom link, as well as all of the registered participants who are joining us on the live stream, thank you for being here. A warm welcome. So my name is Aimee van Wynsberghe. I am the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence, and it is my absolute pleasure to bring to you the world's first conference dedicated to the topic of sustainable artificial intelligence. Now, I can imagine some of you are thinking, why this topic? Why now? Why you? And so just to get us started, I think it's important to clarify that I've been in the robot ethics space and the ethics of artificial intelligence space now for more than a decade. And I've seen some incredible things happening, whether we're talking about the technologies that have been made, the kinds of technologies and the applications that they're used for, but also incredible things happening in the ethics space. We're seeing not only a growth in the kinds of reflections that are happening on the part of academics and scholars, but we're also seeing the inclusion of ethics into the design process of making these technologies, but also inclusion of ethics explicitly into the policy-making space, whether we're talking about something like the ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI at the European Commission level. So I think there's been incredible progress in the last 10 years, but at the same time, I've continued to notice a certain gap in not only how the ethicists are thinking, but also sort of what's happening in the policy-making space. And that gap has to do with the environmental consequences of making and using artificial intelligence and robotics specifically. And so that's why we're here today, to discuss this, to put it on a stage, to put it on center stage, and to start to think about what it would look like if we were to make artificial intelligence in a sustainable way. What would that mean, and what would that look like? So today, there are 4 goals, or not today, sorry, over the next 3 days, I have 4 goals that I'm hoping we can achieve throughout the conference. The first goal is that I really want to emphasize the need to discuss the environmental consequences of making and using artificial intelligence. The second goal is that I'd like us to build a community of researchers in this space. So many of you are new to this space. Many of you have already been in this space for quite some time. And I think it's time for us to come together so that we can have a stronger voice united as one. The third goal is really to learn more about the topic. So I myself am new coming into this space, and I'm really excited to learn who is already researching in this space and what it is that they're doing. And the fourth goal is, of course, as the constructive critical academics that we are, to identify some gaps, to identify some awareness of where we are lacking, where we need more research. And hopefully, once we establish this community, we can mobilize our resources so that we can actually fill those gaps. So I should also stress that this conference is very multidisciplinary. From the academic space, we have people coming from computer sciences. We have people from all across the humanities. We also have people joining us from the industry space. We have people joining us from the policy-making space. So this is very much a multi-stakeholder conversation, a multi-stakeholder dialogue and exploration of the topic. There are many different activities that we have lined up over the next 3 days, really exciting activities. We have 27 paper presentations. Later on today, we have a panel that's co-organized by Algorithm Watch, and I will be joining Matthias Spielkamp from Algorithm Watch, along with State Secretary Johan Flashbarth, to talk about this topic in more detail. Tomorrow, we will have a fireside chat with world-renowned AI ethicist Mark Kuckelberg, and he will discuss his new book with us, hot off the press, talking about artificial intelligence and climate change. On Thursday, on the last day of the conference, we have another panel co-organized by the World Economic Forum, where we will have a variety of speakers who really get into the topic of intergenerational issues and intergenerational justice related to artificial intelligence. We will close the conference with a discussion between myself and ecological artist Thijs Biersteker, where he and I will sit down together and talk to you and present a trailer or a teaser about a project that we are working on together. This is an art installation dedicated to the topic of sustainable artificial intelligence. Now, there are many people and many organizations to thank for making this happen. I don't have enough time to go into all of them right now. I will continue to thank people over the next 3 days. But 2 organizations that I explicitly would like to thank at the beginning. First, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. None of this could happen without the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. I should say that this conference is part of a larger 5-year project that I am doing, funded by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. So many thanks for your support on this. Second, I would really like to thank the University of Bonn, and in particular the Institute for Science and Ethics, and my co-director, Professor Dieter Stormer. Many thanks for the warm welcome to the university, but also for being open to this new topic that we're discussing, sustainable AI, and being incredibly open to welcoming the topic of AI ethics on a more broader scale. Some practical details that I would like to go over. There are 2 platforms that we are using for this conference. So first, we have a Zoom call, and in the Zoom call, we have all of the speakers and the panelists. This is where they will be speaking from. Next, we have the live stream, and all of the registered participants are joining us from this live stream. Each platform has the opportunity to ask questions, and there will be the opportunity or the chance to ask questions to each of the speakers after they have finished their presentation. So please feel free to type in questions at the bottom of your screen underneath the video that you're seeing right now, or for those of you in the Zoom call, please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. So, with that being said, it is time to kick off this conference. Now, I am incredibly excited to bring to you our first speaker. This is Professor Dr. Markus Gabriel, who is one of the world's leading thinkers in the philosophy of artificial intelligence, the ethics of artificial intelligence, and sustainable AI as well. He's an incredible academic, a wonderful mentor as well, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say to us to kick off this conference. So, Professor Markus Gabriel, I hand the stage over to you. Thank you so much for being here this morning to join us, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Amy, and first of all, congratulations on organizing this amazing conference on such an important topic, and well, thanks for bringing a lot of radical innovation also to philosophy here at the University of Bonn with your research focus and your activities. So I will contribute to this. Oh, I see the rector is coming in, so maybe we hand over to Michael Hoch for a couple of greetings, and then I start my keynote. Nothing has happened yet, Magnificent.
Okay. So sorry, I'm late. So so I just wanted to jump into this conference literally, Amy. So this wasn't planned before. So I just spontaneously decided to greet you, to say a word of welcome, because I was so fascinated by the topic. And at the same time, I'm so amazed by the fact that so many people, so many participants of this conference internationally have come together for this interesting topic, sustainable AI. And as the rector of the university, I just wanted to demonstrate that this is important, and to in a way to say that this is very heartful. At least this is what I'm trying to say here. That I'm very proud, Amy, that you managed to do this, because in a way, Amy is at the university only. She came only recently to the university. She's a professor only recently here, and the fact that you have organized this fantastic conference is great, and this is just to tell you, that I'm very proud that you did this, that you're doing this. And so the topic, I was amazed at the connection of sustainability on the one hand and AI on the other, because in a way, the question is, what is the cost to do that? Because we know that electricity is quite a challenge, right? And the question is that sustainable at all? So this is somehow a contrast, an opposition. So sustainability and AI on the other hand. So the question is, what are the costs? And I think this will be the topic that you're going after. Like this is the environmental aspects to this, the economical aspect, the social aspects of this connection, and I think this is very, very interesting, and in a way connects also across disciplines. This is a very important topic for my university too. We realize that many topics of the future can be tackled only through interactions of people coming from different disciplines, right? It's very interdisciplinary, or if you want, transdisciplinary, because there's also institutions outside the university that are needed to be involved into this topic, to really have a discussion which is not only academic, but which has which impacts on the society as well. And so you need many players, many stakeholders to come together to kind of create something valuable for the society. And so therefore it is not only timely, and it's not only a very interesting opposition, right? So which we academics like to tackle, but it's also for the university. It's the middle of our strategy to act across disciplines. So this is why I just spontaneously decided to come here to thank you, Aimee, and your, of course, your team and your collaborators, and of course the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and the Institute for Science and Ethics, who are co-organizing here, but also to you personally, what a fantastic job you did in the few weeks that you were at the university. Thank you to all the participants. Like there's almost 300 I saw, right? This is quite amazing, and so I'll hand over again. And please excuse that I was a little late.
Of course.
But I hope you felt my enthusiasm for the whole thing. So thank you.
I do. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really, it's a privilege to have you here and to say some words about the conference. I really appreciate it. And it's really nice to see you again as well.
Yes.
And yes, you're right. We actually hit the 300 mark this morning. We had 300 registrations. So I think it's really great to see so much excitement and enthusiasm on the topic here in Bonn, but also outside Bonn, outside Germany. So I'm really pleased about that. But thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now, Markus, take two. We hand the stage over to you.
Thank you again, Rector Hoch. So I'll come back now to the setup of my keynote. So today, my talk has basically two parts. First, I will deal with the issue of the meaning of AI. So what are we talking about when we talk about AI, which then provides the foundation for thinking about sustainable AI as part of the ethics of AI in the second part of my talk, where we'll make some overall recommendations. And given that we're in a radically multidisciplinary setting, I will, of course, clarify all the terms that I will be using throughout this talk and then draw consequences from this. Well, this is just a philosopher's job. So part one, the meaning of AI, or what is AI, if you like. And then part one also has two parts. I will start with the meaning of I in AI. So this will slightly be less philosophical than you might think. So I will not be talking about the I will be talking about intelligence. And then I will be talking about the meaning of artificiality, which then leads me to various dimensions of sustainability and how to think about sustainable AI, Aimee's proposal, in the context of the rapidly developing and increasingly interesting discipline of ethics of AI. So this is the setup for my talk. So let's start the meaning of artificial intelligence. So first of all, what's intelligence? We all know that many computer scientists and other people in the field like to dodge the question, and I have sympathy for trying to avoid answering the question. But as a philosopher, this would, this is unacceptable in my neck of the woods. So I have to try to answer the question, what is intelligence? And in order to do some groundwork for the ethics of AI. So let me be quick. let intelligence mean, of course, the word intelligence has many meanings, but my claim is that the target meaning of intelligence in the AI context is roughly the following. So it's a measurable quantity, and the measurable quantity refers to the capacity of a living system, paradigmatically. I'll get to that. So the capacity to solve a given self-maintenance problem in a finite amount of time. And now we can abstract from the grounding in the animal world or in living beings, the evolutionary background, which will play a role later in my talk, and just say that intelligence is the capacity to solve a given problem in a finite amount of time. And in light of this conception of intelligence, we can, of course, define other terms that play a role in our context, such as learning. So let learning be the replacement of a problem space by a better problem space. So it's not just the solution of a problem, it's the replacement of a problem space by some other problem space. And the criterion for learning is that the enhanced problem space is capable of, for instance, identifying patterns in an earlier problem space that were invisible given the framework within which we were operating and so forth. So that would be learning then in this particular context, the replacement of a problem space by some other problem space. And intelligence in that sense is a measurable quantity. It's not easily measurable. There are, of course, multidisciplinary debates about the concept of intelligence, if that is the concept of intelligence. So there's psychometrics, but then psychometrics, of course, applies differently in, with respect to different animal species, and not to mention, of course, AI systems which precisely are not living beings and therefore not easily subjected to the kinds of methods characteristic of the measurements we need to perform in order to measure the quantity of intelligence. But that's intelligence in general. So living beings are a paradigm for this concept of intelligence for various reasons, in particular for the following reason, which raises technological and technical issues in various fields that, non-philosophical fields, of course, that play a role in AI research. For instance, the following. So how can we identify a given pattern in a highly complex problem space? Well, we do this, and so do other animals, because biological and cultural evolution have provided a background for the restriction of a problem space. Let that be the concept of interest. We have interests, and the interests that we have define the problem space, restrict the problem space that is so much as available for us, be it in the form of conscious information or just largely non-conscious background information in the self-maintenance machinery of a living system. So that's what philosophers of AI since the 80s have been calling the background. So the background is a bunch of, contingently existing capacities that we draw on in order to solve problems in highly complex systems. So not everything that is currently available in principle in my causally proximate environment is relevant for performing the task of giving a keynote, and the pre-selection of criteria of relevancy is performed by background operations, most of which are non-conscious, such as the growth of my cells or the transmission of electromagnetic radiation through my organism, the neuronal operations and so forth. So most of this is non-conscious, and some parts of this are conscious, and the overall background that is thereby provided allows me to identify relevant patterns in my environment in order to perform the function of giving a keynote lecture. And so in living organisms, the background solves a lot of problems that we need to reproduce in non-biological material and with the help of explicit programs, mostly explicit programs in the context within which we're operating as AI researchers and producers of AI technology. So that's of course part of the progress in the field of AI research to combine, for instance, knowledge from the life sciences and cognitive science and so forth, in order to understand the processes that take place in animals better, and to be able to identify structures in those processes that we can then reproduce in a very different format, that is by way of producing AI models. So that's the concept of intelligence, which is grounded in processes that are constitutive of living beings. So living beings or organisms are paradigms of intelligence for that reason. Now, the background cannot be fully reproduced by any AI system in principle. As we know, as the saying goes, it's not the best saying, but it's helpful as a saying. As the saying goes, all models are false. That's not quite correct. Models are not eligible in all respects for truth and falsity. But the idea, of course, is that models have to share some relevant structural features with their target systems, but they typically do not collapse into their target systems. There's an interesting debate to be had in the philosophy of AI, whether AI systems are models or target systems of the concept of intelligence. I assume throughout this talk that AI systems, what we currently refer to as AI systems, are thought models. That is, that they don't do any thinking in the way in which we animals think. That's an assumption, but we would have to argue, like if you think that AI systems are literally intelligent, then you would have to demonstrate that there are background operations that are sufficiently similar to the background operations in living beings, so as to count as literally intelligent. It doesn't change a lot, right? So I'm not putting any limit on AI research by grounding intelligence in organisms. So this is not a claim of the form only conscious entities or only organisms can ever be intelligent. That's not the claim. So what I'm saying is just that AI research has a certain form. It needs a paradigm, and the paradigm is the living organism. And maybe to some extent consciousness. It will depend on which functions you want to model. So that's part one of part 1A. Part 2 of part 1, the meaning of A in artificial. So what is the sense of artificiality, which then leads me to sustainable AI, as you will see in a second. So artificiality in artificial intelligence, I think, refers to the idea that the systems that we created, including software and hardware parts of the overall AI system, are socially produced and maintained artifacts. So you need a lot of sociality, human sociality, universities, departments, research teams, corporations, states, regulations, and so forth. So there's a whole social, socio-political, socio-economic environment for AI systems, without which they could not exist or be maintained. So AI systems currently are not capable of stable self-maintenance. So if my smartphone, say, runs out of energy, it doesn't walk to the next charger, right? It just dies. And the same thing is true for the entire socially maintained organization of energy on planet Earth. So this is currently a human project to maintain certain energy flows in existence. They are highly fragile, subject to potential cyber attacks, which is a big debate again these days in the G7 meeting and so forth. It's a serious problem or topic for the 21st century. How can we maintain the electric infrastructure of humanity? Without human sociality, the system just implodes. So if we didn't do anything on the level of energy production and maintenance, AI systems would very soon run out of steam. Okay, so that's again part of the sense in which they're not living organisms. They are embedded in a further system, which is human sociality. So that's why they're called artificial intelligence. Now, everything would change if we had literal biological material organized in a certain way according to the principles of, say, computer science. So everything would change if we not only had, say, DNA-based computing, which is neuromorphic, But again, that's slightly futuristic. But if we had like literal biologically produced artificial intelligence, that is of course in principle possible, then those systems would be literally intelligent and so forth, and that would raise a different kind of ethics of AI. So think of the Daleks in the TV show Doctor Who. They're basically robots run by neural nets, right? They're killer robots, they're evil and so forth. But even if they're nice, right? So imagine a future where you can build a literal system of neurons, right? Implement it in a robot body and let it perform certain functions for you, such as working in the car industry. So would this be ethically acceptable? So imagine the system is conscious, right? Now, of course, if you can produce it in such a way that it's a happy, conscious, industry worker, like a happy slave, then you might wonder if this is ethical. But I would want to say, as you will see in part 2, no, this would still be unethical, producing a happy robot slave with a happy, conscious robot slave, as you will see in part 2. I think this is unethical. So I think we would have to rule this version out of literal, very literal neuromorphic computing. But it's very futuristic anyhow, so not a topic for me. So I assume that we're talking about artificial intelligence in roughly the current meaning of the term here, right? So this is why I had to set up part 2 in this particular way. Now, part 2, the radical animal and sustainability. So human beings are the producers, evidently, of AI systems. And we do not only produce them, we maintain them in existence. So they are partly autonomous in the relevant sense that they develop internal structures by way of smart engineering, which is a human activity. And then, of course, they process information in all the sophisticated ways that we have been witnessing over the last decades. But the autonomy of operation is embedded in processes of human sociality. Now, what is then the human being? So let me say what we are, the human being. I understand us, human beings, as the kinds of animals that are capable of leading a life in light of a conception of what they are or who they are. And this is the groundwork of ethics. Just by way of a comparison, lions do not typically discuss whether they should become vegetarians. Chimpanzees do not wonder why feminism is so absent from the alpha male group, right? So issues of fundamental behavioral adjustment in light of higher level moral insight do not systemically arise in other animals as far as we know, right? So this is an empirical claim, but I had a recent debate with Jane Goodall, and I even thought that other animals, non-human animals, were capable of more than she confirmed. So I'm willing to grant the other animals as much as I can, but as I said, the issue of vegetarianism is not usually a problem for the lion, even though the lion might have all sort of empathy for some of her victims and so forth, which is why there's a relevant asymmetry between us killing a lion baby and a lion killing a human baby. It's ethically worse, I want to say, that we kill lion babies than that lions kill human babies. It's ethically worse because we are capable of understanding what we're doing from the standpoint of higher morality, and they are not. So I think that ethics is anthropogenic. It's grounded and produced as a discipline, evidently, like AI research and computer science, by human beings. But this immediately entails animal liberation. So the fact that the human being is at the center of ethical reflection does nothing to prevent animal ethics. Trivially, humans are animals. So even if ethics were only regulated the relationships between humans, we would have animal ethics because we are animals. But given that other animals are also animals and are, as I will now argue, inside ethics, we owe something to other animals as well. So a few words about that, the meaning of ethics, and then you will see why sustainability is such an ethical topic by its very nature. So by its very nature, sustainability is part of ethics. So in general, ethics, as I conceive of it, is the discipline that is in the business of discovering moral facts. A moral fact is a true proposition characterizing what we ought to do or ought not to do simply because we are human beings. So, for instance, you see a baby that's drowning in a shallow pond, right? And you're fully capable of just saving the baby by taking it out of the pond, right? And in that situation, it doesn't matter who you are or who the baby is, right? You ought to save that baby. And there's zero cultural disagreement, by the way, between human groups concerning that situation. So you can replace the baby by any baby, and you can replace by the human by any human capable of getting the baby of the out of the pond in 1 minute, right? So it doesn't matter who you are. There's a moral fact for the situation which says that you ought to save that baby, right? You ought not to commit genocide and so forth, right? These are obvious moral facts. I think that it's an obvious, equally obvious moral fact that we need to achieve dynamic stability in highly complex systems, which involve both humans, non-human animals, and the overall environment of these systems, what's sometimes called nature or just the environment. But these are, of course, misleading terms because there's only an environment for a system. There's no such thing as the environment, and there's also no such thing as nature, to which, say, animals are opposed. That would, of course, be a completely nonsensical idea. Like either we are part of nature, or I do not even understand what nature means. So that's not an option to oppose, say, the human or animals and nature and the environment. Environments are environments for a system. That's what an environment is. There's a system and its environment. Now, the sense in which we ought to protect our environment is precisely the sense in which ethics is anthropogenic. So there wouldn't even be insight into moral facts at all if there weren't human beings. So we have to protect human beings in order for there to be entities that are responsible to, right, that react to, that are open to the moral facts. And the moral facts then in turn tell us that we ought to protect non-human animals and their survival conditions. So that's an obvious moral fact. Now things get more complicated, and this is where sustainable AI enters the picture, right? So from the idea of moral facts, I think you can easily derive, say, the 17 SDGs. So the SDGs all deal with moral facts. Take gender equality. So why is gender equality required from human beings? Well, because human beings are human beings regardless of their sexual self-determination. So let's just go back to the pond scenario. In the pond scenario, it doesn't matter which gender or what gender relations obtain between the human beings that interact in this particular scenario. It doesn't matter for the determination of the moral fact. And this is also one of the many reasons why racism, say, is ethically prohibited. For one thing, there aren't any races, so there's a non-moral factual question concerning races. But even if there were races, human beings would not differ in the status of being human vis-a-vis the alleged race, right? So independently of your philosophy of race or your overall race theory, it doesn't matter which race you are when you try to determine what you ought to do or ought not to do, right? So considerations of race or other, of ethnic background and so forth only play the role that certain minorities ought to be protected in a special way. This is why, for instance, we need to, prevent racial discrimination, which doesn't presuppose that we believe that there are races. You don't have to be a realist about race in order to understand that you ought to prohibit racial discrimination. So that's the context of ethics. Now AI again enters the picture. So why do we need an ethics of AI? So the first wave of ethics of AI super intelligence, right? The machines will take over the Terminator-style scenarios and so forth, right? Let's call this first wave ethics of AI. I think first wave ethics of AI is misguided to the extent to which it assumes that that AI systems are literally intelligence or could become literally intelligence in either the near future or in 2050, whatever the most recent Silicon Valley guess is. I think that we might discuss, of course, issues of superintelligence, but I think that we already have real problems in the ethics of AI, such as sustainability, that we cannot delegate to a futuristic assumption about emerging terminators or slightly more realistic things, right? So I think this is literally a waste of time, given that we have more urgent ethical issues, right? So the more urgent ethical issues derive immediately from the fact that AI systems are embedded in large-scale social systems. So we already use AI systems, for instance, in the context of socially disruptive information and communication technologies, such as search algorithms. People usually are not sufficiently aware, for instance, of the fact that Google is a social network, so you interact with other humans in order to produce certain information flows that change your behavior. The restaurant you attend, maybe the job you have, or the conference you attend right now might be consequences of behavioral change mechanisms that are socially produced and reproduced, among other things, in contexts where AI already plays a role, AI in the most demanding sense of the term. So AI is already embedded in social systems. It's socially produced and maintained, but also influences the maintenance conditions. Why? Well, because we change and also increase our intelligence by way of using AI systems. Remember, I defined intelligence as the capacity to solve a given problem in a finite amount of time. And now we can say that system S prime is more intelligent than system S if it solves the same problem faster. So if I use an AI system, I can solve my problems faster, right? This is part of why science is progressing rapidly in the century, thanks to computerization, right? You can use whatever, Wolfram Alpha to, calculate the solution of a given, maybe very complicated differential equation or whatever you want to do, right? There are more complicated things, more complicated feats that we perform already, right? So we change the human situation by, among other things, becoming more intelligent in certain fields and less intelligent in other fields. And this changes human society. So in general, then, sustainability is just a consequence. The need for sustainability is just a consequence from the grounding of ethics itself. So let me conclude by a call to action, which I have labeled the New Enlightenment. So the New Enlightenment, and I think this is what we need in the face of the challenges of our century, and in particular AI and sustainability. So I'm very happy that Aimee suggested to really think the two together in light of the issue of electricity, training data, training sets, bias, and all the topics that are already well known from second wave ethics of AI, and create what I would like to call third wave ethics of AI as part of this idea of a New Enlightenment. And the New Enlightenment consists in large-scale transdisciplinary cooperation of science, technology, but also the humanities, politics, and business. And in this large-scale cooperation, we try to determine who we are as human beings transculturally, because humans have different conceptions of themselves, right? Historically and synchronically, human beings differ not just across so-called cultures, but also individually, right? From neighborhood to neighborhood, say, or from street to street. And the humanities are designed to deal with the self-conception of the human being. So we need an adjustment of the conception of the human being in light of what we know from, say, the life sciences and AI research, in order to feed this back into an enhanced environment for the human activities. The overall goal is to actually approach a situation where the currently identified 17 SDGs are met. And this, unfortunately, is very futuristic. but it requires precisely the activity of what we are doing here today, thanks to Aimee. That is the creation of new modes of thinking about the relationship between, among other things, climate change is just one part of sustainability, though a crucial one, and other crises in which the human being is currently embedded. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop here so that we still have a little time for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Markus. I'm just realizing I should get like, you know how they have a laugh reel? I should have like a clapping reel so that we get the feel of actually an audience there clapping for you. But I'm here clapping for you, Markus. That was wonderful. So before I turn to audience questions, and please, anyone who's on the live stream or the speakers in the Zoom call, please feel free to ask questions to Markus. I wanted to ask you some questions about your talk as well. So if we could dive deeper into this idea of, or this concept of sustainability as it relates to sustainable AI, you know, and you broke apart the A, what does the A mean, the I, what does the I mean? I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about what does this sustainability mean? And I think there's pros and cons to the topic. For me, I think, or to the phrase, I think for me, it calls us into this conversation or this focus on the environment and the environmental consequences to the making and the using of the technology. But, you know, we've also seen that there's greenwashing, that's, you know, corporate social responsibility is kind of, you know, taken on a different term. I wonder, yeah, what your thoughts are on the sustainable part of sustainable AI.
So yeah, in passing, I define sustainability without sufficient focus on it as the practice of achieving dynamic stability in a web of complex systems. So I think that environmental issues are important for the concept of sustainability. But if you just think about the SDGs, that's why my example was gender equality, right? Gender equality is tied, of course, to climate change in various ways, right? But I think the reason why only societies that you know, define gender equality as a goal are sustainable is that only gender equality as such, given that it responds to a moral fact about the equality of human beings, is capable of achieving stability in a web of complex systems. So I think that we need to have a larger concept of sustainability, which is at least implicit in the SDGs, right? So I take this as evidence for a different concept of sustainability, but one which clearly transcends the idea that there's such a thing as the environment, and we somehow need to take care of it, right?
Right.
Because so that's why, you know, this is why I said these things about the environment and nature in the first place. Yeah. I think that we need a bigger concept of sustainability, which then also covers, you know, discourse about resilient systems. So I think, for instance, the pandemic is still demonstrating to all of us that we have non-sustainable modes of organizing human societies in a global manner, right? So some things were very sustainable, such as you know, the technology that led to vaccines, right? So this is very sustainable. It's a very sustainable economic ecosystem. Other parts are highly unsustainable, such as you know, the relation to borders and nation states and other issues, right? So that's why I have this larger concept of sustainability, and I want AI to contribute, and AI research to contribute to sustainability in the general sense, right? Yeah. So for instance, why reduce biases in data sets? Well, in order to have more equal society, right? So, but then of course we might also, I think this will be part of the ongoing conversation in the next days. Of course, we can also try to use AI studying the maintenance conditions of electricity and energy in order to figure out how we can, for instance, distribute, you know, nodes in our electricity network in a more sustainable sense of the term, right? So AI needs to be sustainable, but AI can also contribute to sustainability. I take that to be a case of what you and I tend to call ethics in and by design.
Right, of course. Okay, so I have a question, I guess, sort of picking up on the same theme that we were talking about. Do you see sustainability as an end in and of itself, or do you see sustainability as an action that is instrumental towards achieving something else like flourishing?
Yeah, that's of course a wonderful question. So I think that flourishing, or happiness as the traditional philosophy has called it, but that's just basically flourishing, what the Greeks call eudaimonia, right? Happiness and so forth. I think this is tantamount to what we now call flourishing, as a goal of well-being, not just well-being as a state, but as a goal, I think that this coincides with sustainability. I think that, happiness and sustainability are the same. Let me be blunt about this. I think that, ethics as a reflection about the nature of, academic reflection about the nature of moral facts is grounded in pro-social behavior in mammals in particular. Mammals are particularly pro-social for obvious reasons and biological reasons. And I think that our pro-sociality, which defines the space of flourishing for humans, because we're constitutively social. We are not social by accident, we are social through and through. And this sociality, which is constitutive of us as human beings and other animals, that I think is identical with sustainability. Sustainability is, as it were, right, a diachronic conception of stable flourishing conditions.
Okay, nice. And then another question about sort of the topic in general, but as this topic is very new and up and coming, right? There are a few researchers that are working on this space, and they're somewhat fragmented. So again, as I said, this is about establishing a community. But from your perspective and your take on this, what would you say is the greatest challenge that the sustainable AI community is facing today, or should be thinking about right now as we kind of mobilize and align ourselves?
Well, I think that we are all facing the challenge that we need a new model, globally acceptable model of governance. So we have problems with institutions. So what we need, I think, is for one thing, already functioning sustainable institutions like universities, say, right, need to define their reproduction conditions, hires, distribution of resources and so forth, in light of the overall goal of sustainability. But this also needs to happen at the at the interface of business, politics, and academia, say, right? So, for instance, we need what the philosopher Robert Brandom has called a new spirit of trust. So we need to create a community where it's very clear that our overall goal is sustainability. And that requires, that's why I brought the humanities in, transcultural investigations. For instance, the current, political landscape, global landscape, is full of mostly ridiculous stereotypes, right? About Chinese and Europeans and Americans and so forth, right? The AI debate, right? European values. I wouldn't even know what they are, right? So either they are values and then they're human values, or there's something European, and that's fine. I'm European, I'm a happy European, but I do not think that there could be something like European values or Western values, right? So this very opposition is already misguided. Now, for this, we would need the humanities, for instance, in order to achieve transcultural cooperation also in the field itself. And that's a huge challenge, because AI, given that there's huge technological and economic interest in this technology of the future, right, investments and so forth, there are power flows. And so what we need to achieve, that's why I call it nothing less than the new enlightenment, is a structure of the power flows that is directed by moral insight. That was the idea of the Enlightenment. Yeah? So restructure, right, institutions so that they contribute to moral progress. And if we don't achieve that, then ethics and therefore the good will remain in opposition. And as long as the good is in opposition, right, the course of history tends towards evil. And I think this is what we are facing right now globally. So it depends on us, of course, how we steer institutions in the right way, but it does require very serious transdisciplinary cooperation.
Wonderful.
And that's the biggest challenge that I see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Markus. Well, I don't have time to take any more questions right now because I want to stick to this this time schedule, and we have a short break right now. But a huge, warm thank you to Markus for joining us to kick off this conference and to do it in such a charismatic and thought-provoking way. Now, to the rest of us, we have a 15-minute break. We will regroup at 10:30, where we will get into paper session 1, which is titled, "How Can AI Help Us Be Sustainable?" So thank you again for joining us. Enjoy your 15-minute break, and thank you again, Markus Gabriel, for the wonderful keynote.